Wait for it, and we're live. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans. It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just a couple of nerdy veterans and one chaos coordinator geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So without further ado, we are going to let our guests introduce themselves to our listeners and viewers at home. And we're going to start with you, Miss Abby Goldsmith.
Yeah, I'm the author of the Torth series, which is a million words, 6 books of epic, dark sci-fi with bioengineered superpowers.
Yeah, and she was a recent guest, so it came out. Her interview was season 5, so you can scroll back a couple episodes and you'll see it. It's worth giving it a listen. Next, we have the legendary Mr. Bill Fawcett.
Makes me sound older than I am. Hey, man, Abby. I've been an editor for about half a century. Guess I am old. My most recent book is Never Again in the Blood and Armor series, and a couple of books with a talented author named Casey Moores in that series as well, starting with the book Never Again. I've been a game designer for 45 years and generally hang around the industry and watch other people be more creative.
Okay. That's one way to look at it. He's been on the podcast before talking about that Blood and Armor series twice, which is it's an amazing series. I did a review on it. If you want to type that in over there on Upstream Reviews, lots of good books over there that are recommended. But it was scary how accurate you were on some things on modern war. So I really, really appreciated the attention to detail.
Thank you.
So you've reached Tom Clancy levels, though, when the CIA and the FBI show up and they ask how you got certain information. I don't know if they do that anymore.
I have friends.
Next, we have Mr. Matthew C. Lucas.
Hey, JR. Thanks for having me on. My name is Matt Lucas. I'm a speculative fiction author, writing mostly fantasy. Got 3 novels out right now and a couple more that are in the production pipeline with a couple small presses. My first one that came out, though, was a grimdark doorstop of an epic fantasy called The Mountain.
Now, are we talking like Brandon Sanderson level of doorstop, or the Lord of the Rings before it was split in 3?
Less than Sanderson, because I don't think that's a high dense level of doorstop to reach, but more than your average, about 250,000 words.
Okay, I know Sanderson's numbers hit the edge of what print on demand can do for formatting. Because I've done that with one anthology. Never again will I have an anthology that big, but we had to go to 10-point font to fit all of the stories in. Yeah, you could hurt somebody with those big books.
Yeah.
As an editor, you can split it in 2 parts and make twice as much money.
This was the second anthology I ever did, and it was a learning experience. It was when they were doing in 2019, the storming Area 51 was going to happen. And the joking catchphrase was, "They can't stop all of us." It started as a joke. It was going to be the Woodstock of our generation. It was just a party outside the gates. The FBI took it seriously. They mobilized the Air Guard and the Air Reserve, and then they went and they got the guy to take the post down. And the anthology that I spent a lot of money on didn't hardly sell. So lesson learned. But there were so many great stories. I just said yes to everything. I learned the hard way. That's an expensive way to roll. Because as you know, editors aren't cheap. And if you want good ones, you got to pay them. They got bills too and all, but yeah, it's fun though. I still recommend it. Good stories in there. So if you like the storming Area 51 concept, where we see what's behind the iron curtain that is Area 51, go check that out. All right. So next, dear listeners, how we first found them. So we actually we met fighting the heretics that were infesting the Empire, but we rooted them out, blood for the blood god, and we moved on. And so obviously we are here to talk about grimdark fiction. I know you read the title, so you figured that out already. So our religion questions are aimed accordingly. So we got to pick your poison today. Judge Dredd, Warhammer 40K, or the Chronicles of Riddick. Abby, we're going to let you go first.
Judge Dredd. I mean, it's, lone wolf against a horrible dystopia where, I don't know. I mean, it just fits everything that I like.
Plus the cool leather coat. You can't go wrong with leather coats.
Yes.
All right. What about you, Bill?
Oh, I think I've got to go with Chronicles of Riddick. It carries over on my Coram, the Last Prince, Michael Moorcock love when I first got into it. A hero who's the last remnant, he thought, obviously when Moore turned up, of his race with excellent superpowers practically, and against an impossible situation and overcoming it. Hard to resist.
Absolutely. And Matt, what about you?
I'm going to round this out. I'm going to go with Warhammer 40K. I haven't read but maybe 4 or 5 of them. But the first one by Dan Abnett was really good. I'm not really a sci-fi fan, but I really, for some reason, that one was really immersive. I really enjoyed it.
The Black Library, who's the one that owns the Warhammer, they put out some quality stuff. They had some about the tanks that they did. I'm drawing a blank on it, but I remember being fascinated by the concept where you've got the actual guy leading the tank, but he still has a sword because F you, why not? And I appreciate it. That's the one when you get all these, on the various fandom type groups, with property A versus property B, who wins? Warhammer's the ultimate like F you to everybody because like nobody can beat that, but it's designed to be so ludicrous that it almost is untoppable. Although I imagine it's been around long enough, someone's going to try to out Warhammer the Warhammer. It's bound to happen. So, all right. Although for me, I got to go Judge Dredd though, because that's the first one of the 3 I found. Plus, like I said, the leather coat was awesome. Now, Abby, when you liked the Judge Dredd, was it the movies, the comics, or some of the books that are out there?
The movies, yeah. I mean, I'm mostly movies and audiobooks.
Audiobooks are still books, yeah. Do you have a preference? They had 2 movies that out. I think one was with Stallone, and I can't remember who was in the other. I've watched both, though.
Yeah, I would prefer the Stallone one. It had that kind of dark sense of humor.
He does a really good at that, the dark humor thing. Yeah. But I'm partial because I grew up on Rambo, so... All right, and because we are polytheistic, Game of Thrones, Lady Hawk, or Hellboy? We're going to go in reverse order this time. So, Matt.
I'll probably go with... I'm reluctant. I'll probably go with Game of Thrones on it. If I could just limit it to like the first 3 books or the first couple of seasons of the TV show.
Okay. Although the ending season gave us a lot of fun bloopers. You got apparently Starbucks is canon.
Starbucks, yeah.
As well as bottled water. I think it was Natural Spring, if I remember correctly.
You can't buy commercials like that, JR.
No, you can't. And the funny thing is, it's like with a book, and someone's like, "Oh, they misspelled this word, or they got this comma wrong," and it's been edited several times. So you kind of just got to respect the persnickety mistake that doesn't want to get edited out. That had a lot of eyes on it, and all of them missed it, which makes it even better.
That's right.
So, all right, what about you, Bill?
I think I'm a Hellboy fan.
Okay.
Not only do I like the lead actor very much, but Game of Thrones, the final ending stopped me. The Hawk, the dragon attack was indulgent or unnecessary. Lady Hawk, if they had strangled Broderick Crawford in the second act, I could have stood it and picked it. But I'll go with Hellboy instead, because I think the questions about your responsibility and your affections based on your nurture, not your nature, are a good basis for a lot of soul searching.
Absolutely. And what about you, Abby?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's pretty hard to decide between Game of Thrones or Hellboy, because I really am a Game of Thrones fan, except for that 7th and 8th season of the show. Completely just tanked it for me. So, yeah. And then, Hellboy, I honestly, all of the movies have been pretty good. I especially like the first 2 that I'm blanking on the name of the actor, but you know who I'm talking about. the guy that played Hellboy in the first 2 movies that were directed by Guillermo del Toro. He did such a good job. So yeah.
What is that? Ron Perlman, I think.
Yes.
Ron Perlman.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hellboy and Golden Army.
I don't know. For me, it's Lady Hawk just for nostalgia, but I'm also a sucker for cheesy B movies. I know it wasn't intended to be made as a cheesy B movie, but it, I watched it. It was already old, so it was dated, and it kind of had that effect. But I really dig the concept. I think I can see what Bill's talking about with the execution leaving room to be desired. That might be an interesting one to get a reboot where they, redo that, maybe fix some of those mistakes.
You mean Lady Hawk without the anachronisms? It'd be quite excellent. Rutger Hauer was a brilliant actor in it, but every time Broderick Crawford sounded like he was from Brooklyn the month before the movie was shot, it took me out of the movie.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm always hesitant to do the remakes because sometimes you make it worse. It's been known to happen. But I did like the plot. I thought it was fascinating. Although I did like Hellboy. I'd never gotten into Game of Thrones. It was a little too grimdark for me. Everybody you like died. Like, oh, I like him. Okay, they died. Oh, I like him too. Oh, nope, dead. So, all right, and because we got to mix this up a little bit. We got one more for the road. So, Sleepy Hollow, Willow, or The Witch, the 2016 movie, not the one from the 1980s. Bill.
Willow.
Okay.
Classic.
It is, absolutely. We will ignore the attempt to make it a series that was horrific.
And how often can you laugh? Tom Cruise is such a good actor. How often do I get to laugh at how bad he was when he started?
Yeah. So are you a fan of the movie Taps then? That was one of his early films too?
Yes.
That's an awesome. I love that movie, but the acting was a little over the top, like high school theater vibe.
Hey, game, we've got some cameras. Let's shoot a movie.
Yeah. All right. What about you, Abby? Sleepy Hollow, Willow, or The Witch?
To be honest, I have not seen The Witch, so I know. I'm gonna have to go with Willow because it's a classic. Yep.
Okay. Matt?
I'm going to go with Sleepy Hollow, and I'll tell you why. Because Christopher Walken in that was masterful. He put on a clinic of growling and snarling, playing that Hessian that it just blew the doors off. So Christopher Walken made it happen, Sleepy Hollow.
Christopher Walken doesn't not make a good movie.
Amen.
Yeah, I like Sleepy Hollow. That's where I would go. I haven't seen The Witch, although I used to get the list. I used the IMDb page for Grimdark by Fantasy and Sci-Fi. So I used their grouping. Obviously, they're not infallible. If anybody's perused their website, they get stuff wrong all the time. But like you got to agree on a dictionary when you play Scrabble. Sometimes you just have to pick a source to cite. But The Witch looked interesting. It was made in 2016, but it's a period piece about almost like Middle Ages Vikings exploring, and the land isn't as unblemished as they think. So it looked interesting. It's definitely on my I want to watch it this year list. So, but I liked Sleepy Hollow. It's a classic as well. At least I remember watching it when it came out in the theater. So I will take it. I also liked the was it NBC? I think did the remake series Sleepy Hollow, where they went into the paranormal angle of it, where the American Revolution was really like good versus evil, the devil versus Satan, or the devil versus the angels kind of thing. I thought that was an interesting take on it as well. But all right, so with that out of the way, we do have to ask the most important of all of the religion questions, because they do sponsor us. So we are civilized human beings here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. We are no longer knuckle dragging troglodytes. So coffee or tea, and how do you take it, Abby?
Tea. How do I take it? I guess steeped any way I want it. I don't know.
All right, that's fair. All right, what about you, Bill?
Tea, herbal, not too heavy.
Okay. Matt?
Every morning I have half a pot of black coffee with just a little bit of pumpkin spice.
Oh, nice. Now, are you adding a syrup pumpkin spice, or are you like actual pumpkin spice powder?
Actual powder.
So do you stir it in, or you let it sit on the top?
It's I've got this whole proportion thing down. It's 3 of decaf, 2 of regular caffeinated, and then like a 3/4 tablespoon of the pumpkin spice at the top. It's all about the proportions.
Why do you do the decaf? Would it not work if you made it extra strong and then broke it with hot water?
I could do it that way, but then I would have heart palpitations for the whole day. So by cutting it decaf, I can drink the half pot that I really want to drink and not have like, go into arrhythmia.
That's fair. I worked as a barista to pay for grad school, so I'm familiar with the process. Back when they used to do that, I was a black apron barista at Starbucks, and I worked at a bunch of smaller coffee shops as well. The process to make decaf coffee, like I avoid it like the plague because it's not healthy. They basically bleach the beans to get most of the caffeine out, and then they add dye that's not the greatest for you to make it look like coffee beans again. So it's not no caffeine, it's just lower. And so where possible, you're better off just cutting it with hot water if you need to.
So you're saying I'm killing myself?
Yeah, the preservatives that they throw in decaf, and it's still got caffeine in it. So whenever people would come up and they would, decaf because I'm allergic. I'm like, no, you're not, because you would still be having a reaction to the decaf. Although dirty little secret, when they were rude to us, we did give them decaf. We didn't spit in their food like some places talk about.
But I was going to say, you could do worse. I mean,
yeah, we definitely gave them decaf when they were not nice to us.
Well, you're nicer than when I was a bartender. If we didn't like them, we just loaded their drinks heavy at the evening and called the cops to catch them going home.
Now that is evil. I guess I am the Diet Coke of evil compared to that. But yeah, I prefer French vanilla creamer in my coffee. But the calories on that, and I'm trying to get back in shape. So I have been drinking my coffee black, which is taking some getting used to. But I've gotten the 8 o'clock brand, which is actually owned, I think, by the Starbucks Corporation now. But it's the 8 o'clock brand. French vanilla is pretty good by itself. And then when I want fancy gourmet, the coffee brand coffee has some interesting flavors, and I like that they rotate those out. And obviously we're shilling for them. So if you do like gourmet coffee, link is in the show notes. Podcast Grunts is the code. You get 10% off. We get a kickback. It's a win-win. All right. So with that, let's talk about the grimdark that brought us here. So first, I went and I found a definition because that's one of the places I like to start. So according to the Oxford Language Dictionary, it's a genre of fiction characterized by disturbing, violent, or bleak subject matter in a dystopian setting. Although they did add, according to their dictionary, that it was more common in fantasy, which I disagree with. I think there are just as many sci-fi settings with the advent of like Warhammer 40K at all. So I don't know that I buy the fantasy preference, but the grimdark definition. Is everyone mostly okay with that definition? Want to add, subtract?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, to a large degree. It misses one abstract, the freedom of nihilism, the ability to, in a grimdark kind of situation, create your own morality.
Okay. And you think that's
I think that's a significant factor in why people like it.
Okay. I don't think in prepping for this, it's not my normal genre that I read. So I did a lot of like prep work for this, and nobody actually mentioned that concept of nihilism as a contributing factor to both the prose and the.
It's grandson of. It's not true nihilism.
Okay.
In Nietzsche sense, but it has that appeal of saying the rules don't apply, therefore the rules can be broken because the anti-hero is right anyhow, and the situation's so bad it doesn't matter. And that's a sense of freedom when you're thinking about it or writing about it. Your character can be evil and nasty, and he's still appropriate a hero.
Okay. Abby, Matt, do you want to add to that? Are you okay with that addition to the definition?
No, I mean, I think Bill makes a good point. Flip the coin over. I think the most frequent criticism that gets leveled at grimdark as a genre is the nihilism. And people like, I just can't handle that there's no good, there's no evil. It's just might makes right. So it is very liberating, but I think it depends on your taste. I mean, there are a lot of folks that level that criticism against it for that very reason.
It's not always might makes right. I mean, it could also be the smartest one wins.
That's
okay.
Fair.
That's a form of might. I'm a 5'5" guy who was in the merit finalists in the 60s. I had to win that way, but it's might.
That's fair. Yep.
So is it a possibility of a hopeful ending and it still could be grimdark, or would the hopeful ending at the end pivot it out of the genre of grimdark fiction?
I would love to know that, because I never know if I should categorize my own series as grimdark or not for that reason. Yeah.
I think for me, what characterizes the genre isn't so much that knowing that it's going to end badly, much less that it's going to end well, but that there is a very realistic chance and probability that it could end very badly. In other words, that your main character or main characters in this, they are all fair game, and any one of them could eat it at any point in the story for maybe any reason. It's so you contrast it with sort of the classic high fantasy where you get to the final battle scene and it's the main character strides under the camera and buckle on the plot armor and don the meat shields. We're going to the final battle, and we all know he's going to win. He's going to be fine. I think for me, what characterizes the genre is that you just don't know. It might end up fine and dandy at the end, but it just as well might not.
I've always seen the grimdark I've read as being almost derivative of the Viking sagas, especially the Icelandic sagas, where their universe is a grimdark universe. They're going to lose. Ragnarok is a defeat by the giants. You know this already, and all you can do is prepare for it. So it gives you a lot of moral laxity in the meantime, which they did take advantage of historically. And it meant that you didn't have to win, you just had to lose with style to be a famous Viking, basically. And that's grimdark. It's our dark universe that probably not going to end well, so we can do what we want, but we're going to accomplish some purposes, even if we use that's grimdark, and that's a historical model.
When I was reading Joe Abercrombie's The Blade Itself, a lot of people cite that one as a grimdark series. And the first two books, I was like, what is this? This feels like epic heroic fantasy, But the final book, the nihilism is there, So I was kind of like, oh, I see why.
I tried to read the Abercrombie book, and it was just too. I ended up hating all of the characters. But one of the things I think the genre of grimdark does get right is there's a tendency to want to make everybody who died in combat in like generic, sci-fi or fantasy, like give them a heroic death, the kind of thing that they write sagas about. And I get it if it's a main character, but I've seen that too much. And sometimes people die just because they're in the wrong place at the right time. And it could be capricious and no reason for it. And I think you see a lot of that in grimdark, and that matches my experience with combat. So I think they get that part right, which I think has merit, to show how horrific it can be. But like with the Abercrombie one, the Logan Nine Fingers, he was just unprofessional in how he lost control. Because, the Vikings had the berserkers who raged out and fought, but they didn't lose control to the point where they were like compromising themselves or their mission. Whereas sometimes at least with Abercrombie, that book, it felt like he was as much a danger to his men as to himself. And that's what bugged me. Although I could see where it is grimdark as far as all the characters, and like there really didn't seem to be a good guy.
Fair enough. Yep, that's true.
So, Bill, you were going to say something earlier when I asked if it could have a happy ending to wrap up a series in a grimdark setting. Do you think it's possible, or does that take the series at the end out?
Well, the thing is, it's not a happy ending. It's a hopeful ending.
Okay.
You never see the happy. There's a slight chance now it might be hopeful. And that's the effect of media on writers. And especially American writers. The Canadians like sad endings. The Americans like happy endings, and the British never have endings on their books. And it's an old rule from the early times. And to a degree, a hopeful ending on a grimdark is pandering, because it's going to make the reader feel a little better. So maybe they'll buy the next book. So it's very smart pandering, and probably necessary for someone to enjoy it, because we're not writing grimdark, we're writing entertainment that is grimdark.
It's interesting. I think by that measure, my series is grimdark. So.
Yes.
There you go. I've always said that I think I don't mind a grimdark type setting where, it's, hopelessness and despair, as long as there's a light at the end of the tunnel that isn't the train about to run you over.
Yeah.
I get what you're saying, though. It could happen off screen, just knowing there's a possibility of better to make it worth the slog. Otherwise, it just feels like emotional, like whipping yourself emotionally.
We may go under in the end, but I bought us another couple of years of survival.
Yeah.
That's grimdark with a happy ending.
And I could tolerate that. At least it's something hanging your hat on, instead of everybody dies and it still sucks.
Well, even in the old Viking sagas, meaningless death was meaningless death. You had to have a reason and do it with style. Then you were a Viking hero. Even though you're going to go to Valhalla, you're going to practice for the next eternity and then lose the war.
Yeah, that is the one part of the mythos that it's like very hopeless, I guess, in that they get the hero's death so you can fight the war you're going to lose. It's like maybe the other afterlife realms that the Norse had might sound like a better, unless they're participating as well in the final battle. And I don't seem to remember that they were.
No, they don't. They just go away at Ragnarok. They're destroyed as a peripheral thing.
Yeah,
Niflheim and them cease to exist too. Everything ceased to exist except the ice giant's land, and it becomes barren. It's very grimdark.
And yet it motivated people to throw their lives on the blade for a chance to experience it.
It's the only option. That's why it also motivated them to adopt Christianity.
I can see why now. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Because wow, like most people that are my age at least know the Marvelized version of the Norse lore, which obviously isn't. Well, Disney hits everything, and they just prune all the rough edges off, I guess.
Yeah, I was going to say that it was appropriate Disney bought them for that.
Yeah, they did it to all the Grimm's fairy tales too.
And working for Disney is its own form of grimdark.
So, do you think that grimdark as a genre has evolved? You did say that it's affected by media, the way people write it now. So, do you think it was different when it first, became popular, or?
Oh yeah, the anti-hero struggle. You're asking the old guy, right?
Yeah, I was asking you, but the others can weigh in.
Okay. Well, I'll start it then. Yeah, when you go back to, say, Carl Edward Wagner's Cain, very dark anti-hero and a very nasty, vicious, collapsing, fantasy world where things have gone south big time around him, and or Michael Moorcock's characters, his prince, or any of them, that's the last elven prince because he betrayed his people and had most of them killed, so the rest are looking for him, and he's the good guy in the books. And those are back from the 60s, and that fit with our mood of the time, and that was duck and cover. And I'm old enough to have been in grade school when they told us to crawl into our chairs and put our head down, duck and cover, so that you could survive a nuclear blast. Anyhow, but it does have permanent effect on the way you look at the universe. If if I had thought I was going to make it to this age and we weren't going to blow ourselves up, I would have eaten a lot healthy and taken a few less things when I was in college. Okay. Well, the grimdark of those days was a dark where the world was going to end and anti-characters fit in, where everything was falling. You know, the world was going to end up in its fantasy version of nuclear annihilation, or things were going south. And a dark character fit right in. As we got more nuanced and less concerned with blowing ourselves up and worrying about other things instead, I think for a while the grimdark got less dark in a way, less negative, less nihilistic, and concentrated on the characters rather than the situation. And in the last 10 years or so, we seem to be putting the situation back in as well, making it darker again.
I would actually argue that right now we're in an era of cozy fantasy and kind of like heroic, like happy, joy. I think the reason is people are wanting escapism. Like I think there's a lot of doomerism going on. So people are kind of predicting, oh, the world's going to end. And so I think people are looking for escapism. Whereas like when Game of Thrones, when George R. Martin was writing Game of Thrones, Stephen King was writing The Dark Tower and all that, it's during like the roaring 90s. You know, so like, you know, the people had a kind of more hopeful outlook, I think. And so people were audiences were able to kind of digest a more dark epic. I think that's kind of the tide has changed recently, last decade, I mean.
Do you think it's getting less dark again?
Yep.
I wouldn't argue. We got dark in the 90s and around the turn. I think it's getting less dark. I'll agree.
All right, so we're going to pause for a moment. We're going to go to the commercial. I will say I mentioned a Warhammer book about a tank that I referenced. I did a quick Google. It is called Baneblade. It's one of the Black Library's Warhammer 40K books. Highly recommend it. That's the one where the tank commander had a sword, because why the hell not? And that's as good a reason in any to do things in fiction, the rule of cool and all that. And so with that, I'm going to pause for a moment while we shamelessly shill for the man.
When a strange symbol is found at a burned-down historical site, Houston arson investigator Emmy Aninzo goes to work. As mysterious and inexplicably hot fires break out across the drought-ravaged city, she finds herself digging through the ashes of history. It's a race against time to track down the serial arsonist and explain the seemingly impossible heat of fires. As strange evidence begins to pile up, Emmy wonders if the arsonist is insane, or even worse, possessed. Can Emmy and her colleagues find and stop him before the entire city burns? Parsec award-winning author Paul E. Cooley wraps ancient mythology around an eerie contemporary tale that will leave you burning for more. Garrus Inferno, a free podcast novel available from shadowpublications.com and iTunes. Some mysteries shouldn't be solved.
All right, thank you for sticking with us through that commercial interlude. So the book is available on YouTube for free as an audiobook, but the ebook is available and the paperback is available for sale on all the fine book vendors, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and the like. So check it out. Paulie Cooley's a good guy. It's the closest I had to a grimdark novel that I have in my commercial too, so we went with it. So one of the things you got me thinking about, some of the grimdark past that we dealt with, like with the Cold War, was kind of funny, because I remember my parents telling me about the duck and cover drills, and I asked why we in the Tidewater region never did that, and their answer was because everyone knows when the nuclear war starts, we'll get hit first and it won't be our problem. Because there's like 13 military bases in the Tidewater regions of Hampton Roads, although they've consolidated some of them. But yeah, so I was aware that was happening, but it didn't really affect us because we kind of only tangentially talked about it. So do you think the world events that are going on affect the way grimdark is portrayed and then its popularity?
Yeah, I definitely think so.
Matt?
Yeah, I think that's true in genres across the board, but certainly for something like grimdark, Lord knows, if everything's going to hell in a handbasket and, things are careening out of control, the last thing you want to do with what little free time you have is indulge in someone else's fantasy about how much worse it could be. You want something uplifting. So that makes total sense to me.
Yeah. Go ahead, Bill.
Literature always reacts to its environment. Whether it's going up, going down, whether things are good, whether it's the straight-laced 50s produces the 1984s. Everything reacts to its environment. Some across from it, some curing it or relieving it.
That makes sense. I know there were certain novels that were set to be published right around 9/11 that still had the Twin Towers, so they quickly unpublished them and edited it. I know when the pandemic was happening, nobody was reading things like The Strain and other flu pandemic type fiction. I haven't verified the numbers on this one, so Bill might know, but I'm told that military sci-fi was on the decline and MILF fantasy was on the rise during the recent Ukraine-Russia, because when drafts started looking more possible, people stopped wanting to read that kind of adventure because it might be too close to their future reality.
Dark Mill, where desperate, blood splattering, characters dying, military, lost numbers. Humor mill or positive or heroic did well.
Okay. If you're not as in touch with the industry as you are, some of us, we get lagging indicators. It's kind of hard to track the more recent stuff.
Military is doing well again, but it's not the same old military in some ways. There's a veneer of realism over a lot of heroic fantasy.
That makes sense. So are there certain tropes that you think you see a lot of in grimdark fiction? I mean, obviously the setting is the genre, but within that setting, are there certain tropes that you think you see a lot of?
I think one trope or a tropish character, it seems like there is always the kind of shyster character, the one that's always trying to work angles and has no moral compass whatsoever, and is trying to get ahead financially at everybody else's expense. That seems to, like, I can't think of one. I'm not as wide read as you all may, but I can't think of a grimdark book I haven't read that hasn't had that kind of character somewhere pop up somewhere.
You need somebody who's worse than the hero to make the hero look good.
Yeah, I would say that what you generally do see are very, very overpowered villains. And a lot of them, like you want a villain it seems like the hero cannot win because you want to keep the audience guessing. There's no certainty that they're going to win. Yeah.
And I think you get a number of non-introspective characters, reactive characters who react to their environment rather than wondering what the moral importance is or why they're doing what they're doing. They're doing it because they have to, they know they're right, or it's what they're reacting to their environment.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of grimdark explores cultural or societal issues or dysfunctions, basically. And so there's a lot of kind of characters that are playing those kind of roles. Yeah.
Okay. I know, and like I said, I don't read enough of it to have a perfect opinion, so I'm doing some of the research on some of the articles I found, but one of the hallmarks, according to some of the people writing articles about it, was gratuitous gore, cursing, and sex to make it feel more adult was one of the genre tropes that they see a lot of. I don't know if that's so much a trope or just a function of the dystopian.
I would disagree on that, actually. I don't. Yeah, I mean, I don't see that so much. I think that's become kind of a caricature of it or stereotype due to Game of Thrones, the TV show.
Okay.
Because they just really sexed it up, the TV show. they're like having exposition scenes. They're calling it sexposition because they'd have just like explainer scenes full of sex.
Yeah, they're the books, no.
Right, exactly. It wasn't in the books. And when you read things like Wool or the Dark Tower series or The Blade itself, those kind of series, I don't think they're chock full of swearing and sex. They might have a little bit.
Steven does is. The early grimdark, all this, even now, no, it's not commercialized as much. And what was there is there's a lot more sex in our literature and our fantasy and our science fiction than there was 30 years ago anyhow, and it's more accepted. So I can remember when there was Andy Offutt was writing under his pen name a semi-sexy series for Ace, and they were embarrassed to do it. And now they're doing stuff that would curl the hair of editors in those days, sexually.
Yeah, I believe it.
And going to the gratuitous violence part of that definition or that observation, I think it really comes down to I don't read a lot of gratuitous violence. I mean, there's a great deal of quantity of violence, and I think that's reflective of the gritty world that it's in. But like, for example, I finished reading, I can't remember, The Brave or something like that. It was Joe Abercrombie. It was one of the standalones that he did, and the whole book is literally, it follows 4 days of one big giant epic battle. So there's tons of corpses all over the place and people just getting hacked up in all sorts of creative and awful ways. I wouldn't say a page of it was gratuitous because it was part of the story. I mean, it was needed given the story that he was trying to tell in that particular book.
For a side example, my wife writes fantasy and light humor, Jenny Lynn Nye, and she thinks that there's a lot of gratuitous explosions and car chases and fire combat in the movies I like. But I like them because of, and I think we're writing the literature about them. And when you call something gratuitous, it probably means you're attacking it rather than you're criticizing it. Mm-hmm. It's something you aren't comfortable with, so you say it's gratuitous.
Yeah, to me, like, gratuitous is when it's really unnecessary to the story. And I would argue that in a lot of grimdark, it's very necessary to show that much violence because you're showing like just how bad things are, and how impossible it is for that hero. I mean, or whatever, like whatever cultural situation it's critiquing.
And you need it to justify the hero's actions.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
But you see that a lot in history too, with the idea of the Romans had this understanding, for instance, that the general in his triumph is only as good as the bad guy he beat. So there's the tendency to hype up how bad the bad guy was so you can be better for winning. I've seen that argument used against, was Hannibal really that good, or was it hyped up so you could make, Scipio the Elder that much better? And so there is some of it. Go ahead.
He was.
I think so, but I get where he's coming from as a general rule that, if you beat, when you're a giant stomping on the little guy, it doesn't quite sound as heroic, so you have to make them sound better than they were, as a general rule. Otherwise,
whether you're Christianity making the devil a bigger threat, or you're talking about how difficult it was to defeat this foe or that, yes, of course, you build up the opposition to make yourself look good. But you also demonize them. And the Romans were experts at that. The Druids weren't anything like the Romans wrote about them, the Celtic culture. And if you read them, it's grimdark. I mean, they were sacrificing people regularly, cults of the head, and destroying the civilization. And the Romans were liberating the poor Celts from these evil priests. And that wasn't the situation. They had 1,000 years of those evil priests building their civilization.
Meanwhile, the Romans are crucifying people all over the place. But anyway.
Yeah, that's one of the general rule I have.
That was necessary.
And it's okay when our side does it. That's one of the jokes that I tell people when they read about Romans is, no matter how bad it was, it needs to be about 10 times worse to be close to reality of what the Roman Empire looked like. It's that old that American History Part X, where it's good to be king, but everything else pretty much sucks. Now, do you think, speaking of that, do you think when people write grimdark stories that any certain type of character is the norm, or can you see various character archetypes and character sort of classes, I guess, used in the story?
I'll say one of the things I really do like about grimdark is there's usually a very smart character as one of the main characters. Sometimes it's the villain. Sometimes, I mean, I'm thinking Glocta and the Blade itself, thinking Juliet and Wool. Just things like that. And of course, I've got my own series, Super Geniuses. I really like those kind of characters. Oh, okay, Game of Thrones, Littlefinger, or characters, Tyrion, of course. You have these kind of smart characters that are surviving by their wits in a very, very cruel world where they're kind of playing both sides. And it makes it, those are characters I really root for. Those are characters that I think they're just so interesting. So, yeah.
So there's a lot of, obviously dystopian is part of what makes it grimdark. Do you think that grimdark and post-apocalyptic go hand in hand? Because a lot of times it seems like, at least from a casual observation, they do.
Yeah,
I think so. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the story settings in grimdark novels, usually it's where whatever's going on in the society, it's at least flirting with the apocalypse. So whether it's post-apocalyptic or whether you're right on the verge of having it, I mean, it's part of setting the stakes for a lot of these stories.
You have to justify the situation, you have to justify the actions, and you've got to have a whole lot of dark things happening. You're almost mandatory that something's very wrong at that point, or it's not justified writing that character in that situation.
Yeah, exactly. It's like it's either an apocalypse, a post-apocalypse, or some kind of horrible dystopia.
So do you...
or a pending apocalypse.
Yeah. Do you think that modern grimdark, since you talked about it becoming slightly more hopeful as the times have evolved with the genre, do you think it'll ever lose the bleakness? Or if that happens, do you think it stops being grimdark at that point?
Yeah, if it loses some bleakness, it's not grimdark. But to be honest, I'm seeing less grimdark in popular fiction. Like, the big thing that came out recently was Dungeon Crawler Carl, which I don't know. I don't know if anyone would really call that grimdark. I mean, I don't know. No. Okay. Yeah. I mean, yeah, like we're not really seeing big, giant, like Game of Thrones, Dark Tower series, grimdark cultural sensations lately.
Okay. Now, from a traditional side, since that's your experience, Bill, do you think grimdark was that an easy sell or a hard sell to get through publishers? Because I know things sort of ebb and flow genre-wise. Was that always one that was a harder sell?
Yes. As a rule, it was not a hard sell, but it depended on the quality of the book. And the early grimdarks, of course, weren't called grimdarks. The term's not popular for another 30 years.
Okay.
You just had good books, and they called them dark fantasies. And they weren't a hard sell because there was always an interest in that. Interestingly enough, they were a strong sell just after Vietnam when all the guys came home, where we got the dark military like the David Drakes. They were all vets. It was part of the appeal. I think it's probably going to be a harder sell in 5 years than it is now, unless something seriously goes wrong, or goes right either, because things are more precarious all the time lately, and people escape instead of follow the trend of danger when things are precarious, when things are up in the air.
If you're reading to escape, then you want enough distinction between reality and the fiction you're reading. That's that meme floating around about your dystopian is now in the current event section. And the great thing about that is it's apolitical because both sides use that meme depending on whose side won. Okay, so
it's getting harder and harder to write a dystopia without copying the newspaper.
Yeah, and some of the times I've read dystopian authors, because I have read some, and I'm like, can you stop giving them ideas?
Have you been following DR Congo, Rwanda, Sudan?
Yeah.
Half a dozen other places? If you wrote any novel there, it would be a grimdark.
Okay. Now, we've talked about tropes. Are there common themes that you see in grimdark?
I think the common theme is what grimdark is.
So you don't think there's anything that's layered within that other than just the grimdark, bleak world?
Well, you've got as Abby pointed out, you've got one or two smart characters who are reactive, and you have the situation, and that's a pretty big umbrella, and there's a range under it. Matt's are different from Abby's. Matt?
I think one thing that I've noticed, I was just sitting here thinking about it, that in a few different novels, another kind of stock character, not stock character, but a character that you'll see and a situation that you'll see play out is someone who's in this dark, gritty world who is an otherwise noble person. And the character arc and the story will be such that noble character will end up at some point changing, and changing in a major way such that the nobility will be compromised, but you as the reader will understand why they made that change and why it was necessary, and if it's done well, why it couldn't be anything other than they couldn't end up any other place than where they ended up. So that the idea that the grittiness and the darkness of the world, there's still lights that are shining within it, but it's so bad that it can even swallow up or change those lights. I think that's a theme that I've seen in a few different books.
That is very Nietzschean. The old you stared into the abyss and the abyss stared back.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, is there, as we bring this to a close, because we're getting close to the hour mark and we're trying to do better, dear listener, at keeping it tight. If there's overflow, obviously we'll just bring back guests and panels for future follow-on episodes. So if there's any questions we didn't address and you want us to talk about with Grimdark, shoot me an email. It'll be linked in the show notes. But what is your favorite Grimdark property? It could be literature, film, video games. We'll start with you, Bill.
Well, I'm a big Warhammer fan. I've been a big Warhammer fan since it came out, and I had a hobby shop in the 80s selling it. And when the books came out, those were exciting and fun. And at the time, they were a little less edgy, half the time at least, and so they were a little more relief. So I've got to go. I've been following this because I've been reading Warhammer, since I had hair, which is grim in itself.
All right, what about you, Abby? You got a favorite?
I'll just go with Game of Thrones. I mean, I know that's an answer a lot of people are going to give, and I could name a whole lot of other ones. I'm a fan of this genre, honestly. So, but Game of Thrones is pretty, both the TV show until the last couple seasons and the books.
I'm looking forward to the ending.
Yeah, right. I mean, that in itself is kind of grim and dark.
But not for George. I'm very happy to see he's succeeding so well. He's comfortable.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. What about you, Matt?
I don't know if it counts as grimdark, but I'm going to count it for purposes of this, and then you all can disagree. But Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian, good Lord, that was the most crushingly depressing thing I've ever read, and it was glorious. I mean, it was incredible writing. So I'd stick with that.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to have to go with Warhammer just because the Baneblade book was my first foray into the genre. And first off, for no other reasons than the FU points that he has the sword as the tank officer, the fact that they turned their machines into almost deified them, I thought that was kind of cool. And that's one of those few books that I read I've read several times, and I keep going back to it and finding different things I liked. So, although I do need to check out the Dan Abnett stuff. I'm told that's the Horus Heresies. is worth your time, I'm told. I know Richard Fox has been pestering me to read that for a while. So, all right. Well, is there anything we didn't cover that you think we need to before we wrap this up, Bill?
I guess I would say, like, is there a difference between tragedy and grimdark?
Ooh.
Tragedy is caused by events. Grimdark is caused by decisions.
Okay.
See, he's a smart guy. That's why we bring him back.
We are ending on the high note there. That is good stuff.
Is there anything else you guys wanted to cover before we wrap this up? Okay. Well, this is the part, dear listener, where I remind you to please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right book, so do your part. And when you do the reviews, put what you liked or didn't like about it, and that can help sell it to other readers, I should say. And if there's anything in the grimdark that you like and you want to recommend, shoot us an email, comment in the sections where these are posted, and start a discussion. And we'd love to do that with you. And with that, Abby, how can listeners and readers find you? And as usual, all of the links will be in the show notes.
Yeah, I'm abbygoldsmith.com, and I've got a presence on almost all social media. So yeah.
Okay. And what are you working on right now? The Torth series, book 12?
No, I took a break from the Torth universe. I'm working on a kind of weird epic fantasy with a mathematical magic system.
Math and magic. I dig it. Okay. All right, Bill, how can listeners and readers and viewers at home find you? And then what are you working on?
Bloodandarmor.com or just Never Again and its sequels on Amazon by Bill Fawcett. What I'm working on now is a very dark, grimdark fantasy about a unstoppable magic being battled by people who are eventually going to be turned and have to be killed by the companions once they fight it. And so you have to count on your buddies to kill you when you turn evil, basically. It creates for a lot of camaraderie for the years until you go, knowing you have to count on them to keep you from becoming the enemy. It's called Border of Blood. And probably won't be out until about 26 or 7, I'd guess, depending on the publishers.
It definitely sounds like Warhammer infested the Viking universe, and Norse meets the Warhammer vibes from our pre-show discussion. I'm definitely interested. So we'll definitely have to have you back to talk about that one, and I'll have to check it out when it gets published.
Thank you.
All right. What about you, Matt? Where can they find you, and what are you working on at the moment?
So I'm on Facebook, and I also have a website, MatthewCLucas.com, that I'm pretty good about staying up on top of. It's got a blog feature in it. What I'm working on right now is the third book in a historical fantasy series that is not grimdark, but is kind of fun and droll. Sort of got a Susanna Clark, Jonathan Strange, and Mr. Norrell vibe to it. I'm working on the third one. The first one's called Yonder and Far, The Lost Lock. That's out already. The second one is in edits now and should be out a little later this year. And hopefully this time next year, the third one will be ready to go.
Oh, freaking standing. All right. And you can find us, dear listener, on our Linktree, linktr.ee, Linktree/Blasters and Blades podcast. Again, Linktree/Blasters and Blades podcast, where we link to all the things, the BitChutes, the Rumbles, the YouTubes, the TikToks, maybe the Twitter, the Spotify. We've got our Blasters and Blades Facebook group and Facebook page. We have our email, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Again, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com for professional purposes only, people. Save the shenanigans from Adam Stabby Stab over there on the Instagram, the Twitter, and the email. You can support the show over at buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section that it is for the podcast, and I promise I will keep my co-hosts duly caffeinated. They will drink that coffee brand coffee till it pours out of their eyeballs, people. And with that, I would like to thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For my crazy co-host, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. All right, thank you, Abby, Matt, Bill, for coming on. This was fun. Having fun with the Grimdark. I was not expecting that, but we kept it from being bleak, so thank you all. And with that, I'm going to hit the end button. Wait for it. Wait for it.